We're diving deep today, folks, into the art
Yeah.
and, well, into the mind, really, of Bob Camblin.
Yeah, he's an artist who maybe isn't like a household name.
Wait, right. Not exactly a Picasso or Warhol, but his work, it sticks with you,
It makes you think. It makes you look, like really look.
definitely. And that's what we're going to unpack today. What gives his art this intriguing staying power? And for those of you who love getting to the heart of things, without drowning in a sea of details, you're in for a treat.
Absolutely. We've got this fascinating collection of Camblin's own words, like those thought-provoking quotes he's known for.
Yeah, his quotes are something else.
And we'll be walking through some key moments from his life. Definitely not your conventional artist's bio, I can tell you that.
Oh, intriguing. Yeah, we're even going to zoom in on a specific piece, his lithograph file.
Right. Fire. And we're aiming to pull out the real insights from all these sources, his own writings, what others have written about him, his thoughts on his own art.
So you walk away with a solid grasp of his unique vision. Okay, so your mission, if you choose to accept it, and let's be honest, you already have by hitting that play button, is to really understand the core of Camblin's philosophy as an artist.
Exactly. Like, what were his fundamental beliefs about art, about how to navigate life, and about that sometimes messy creative process?
Yeah, and what is it about his way of seeing the world that just keeps people, coming back for more, keeps them captivated?
For sure. And to kick things off, let's immerse ourselves in some of his own words. Those enigmatic quotes he was known for.
Yeah, they're like little puzzles.
Right, Camblin's quotes. They're like
Yeah.
like breadcrumbs leading you into his head. And you'll notice there are certain themes he keeps coming back to over and over, like impermanence.
The idea that nothing lasts forever.
Exactly, like when he says, fortunately, some things remain forever, or another 10 years, perhaps. He's kind of like poking fun at the whole idea of permanence.
Right. There's that wry humor he was known for.
Yeah, totally. Like acknowledging that even the things that seem permanent aren't really. And then there's this one, as they approached the memory of songs and music stopped at the moment the texture of its decay became visible to them.
Wow.
Okay.
Right. It's almost like it's unsettling.
It is a bit unsettling. The idea that even our memories, those precious things, they fade, they decay.
Yeah, it's all temporary, right. But at the same time, Camblin also saw these unexpected connections
Yeah.
between things that seem totally different. He said, look into the atom, you get what you need. Look into magic,
Yep.
and you get what you need. Philosophy and art are in both.
So he's seeing some kind of like hidden unity between science and magic, philosophy, art. It's interesting.
It is, right, like this underlying interconnectedness. And what I think is really insightful for anyone trying to understand Camblin is that he was always searching for a balanced viewpoint.
Yeah.
Amidst all this complexity, like he said he was sticking with common sense, aiming for the perfectly average view of the universe.
Perfectly average. Yeah. So he can, enjoy miracles on both sides of science and magic. He didn't want to get stuck in one way of thinking.
Makes sense. Stay open to the wonder, right?
Exactly. Don't get too attached to any one perspective.
And for him, intuition, gut feeling, that seemed to be like a guiding principle. Didn't he say the sixth sense is to be without a doubt?
He did. And there's also that raw honesty in I cannot tell a lie to myself for very long.
Wow, so self-awareness was key for him, for sure.
Totally. Like he really relied on his inner compass, especially in his art.
And you see this connection to nature in his quotes, too. Like, find something in nature that completes you and then surrender.
Oh, yeah. And the cosmos waves as me with tree leaves. I mean, these aren't just pretty words. He really felt a deep connection to nature, saw it as like a source of grounding,
Source of balance, maybe?
Yeah, exactly. And when it comes to art, his views were, well, let's just say they were different. He said, art is not just images. Art for art's sake has become art for life's sake, or art for my sake, or art for survival's sake.
So he's saying art serves a deeper purpose. It's not just about, pretty pictures.
Right. It's about something more fundamental, something essential to being human. And then there's that one that always makes you think, art is and it isn't, and now everyone knows.
Yeah, that one's cryptic for sure.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder about the state of art today.
Totally. Like, has art, in becoming so accessible, has it lost something?
Good question.
And then there are those quotes about the creative process, like step off the train of thought, and that one almost like a meditation: when you think, don't act. When you act, don't think.
So he's advocating for like a more intuitive approach to creativity.
Yeah, going beyond just thinking,
Yeah.
letting something else guide you.
And he didn't shy away from doubt either, or the need for patience. He said, in the balance, patience and yet, freedom again and yet, in silence, the reality can be maintained.
It's like this image of holding opposing forces,
Yeah,
finding that balance between patience and freedom, something we all struggle with.
definitely. And then there's that line, when understood, all truth is funny. I love that.
Right. It's so paradoxical. Like the deeper you understand something, the more you see the absurdity of it.
Yeah, and that can be a very freeing perspective.
Totally. And he was also very clear about the difference between believing something and actually knowing it. He said, mystics have been somewhere and logic won't make the trip.
Meaning you can't just think your way to enlightenment.
Right. It's about experience.
And he had that interesting take on mirrors. Everyone is a mirror, and that is magic.
Yeah, it speaks to how we reflect parts of ourselves onto each other and how those reflections shape how we see the world. Something to think about, for sure.
Especially in our relationships. And last but not least, there's that warning against being too attached to being right. He said, don't let the demon of being right get in. Flow and think of what you are doing, not what you plan to do. Step off the train of thought.
Like a real call to be more present, more flexible in your thinking.
Yeah, don't get stuck in your head.
Exactly. So even just from these brief snippets, these glimpses into his thoughts, you start to get a sense of how complex his inner world was.
Yeah, he was wrestling with some big questions
Yeah,
about existence, about perception, about the purpose of art itself.
right. So let's shift gears a bit and talk about the man behind these words.
All right, let's get into Bob Camblin, the person, the life, the journey, what shaped his artistic vision.
Okay, so Camblin, he was born in Oklahoma back in 1928, and both his parents were artists. So, that early immersion in the art world, it definitely had an impact.
Makes sense. Grew up surrounded by creativity.
Totally.
Yeah.
And he went on to study at the Kansas City Art Institute, honed his skills. But a real turning point for him, and maybe, this is relevant for anyone listening, was getting a Fulbright scholarship to go to Italy.
Italy.
Yeah, imagine the impact of that, right? Being exposed to all that art history, all that culture, it completely changed his perspective. And later on, he actually spent quite a bit of time teaching.
Really? So he wasn't just making art, he was teaching others how to make art.
Yep. He taught at some pretty prestigious institutions. Ringling, the University of Illinois, Detroit, Utah, and then Rice University down in Houston.
Wow, quite the resume.
Right. But then, get this, in 1976, he decides to just walk away from academia altogether.
Really? Why?
It seems like he just needed more freedom, more autonomy as an artist.
That's a pretty bold move.
It is. He wanted to just completely immerse himself in his art without any of the constraints of academia. So he started traveling a lot
Yeah.
and drawing inspiration from all these different cultures he encountered.
Soaking it all in.
Yep. And he kept creating all through this time,
Uh-huh.
producing work across different mediums. But here's the thing, a lot of his art, it ended up in private collections. It wasn't always out there for the public to see.
There was this air of mystery around him.
Exactly. So we have this guy born in Oklahoma, exposed to all this amazing art in Italy, teaching, then just dropping everything to become this nomadic artist. Pretty fascinating.
Totally. But let's rewind a bit. Before Italy, what were some of his early influences?
Well, growing up in Ponca City, Oklahoma definitely played a role. His parents being artists, that was huge, but also just the visual landscape of the place. The Marland Estate with its grand architecture, the Pioneer Woman statue, these images, they definitely stuck with him. And believe it or not, he was really into The Wizard of Oz.
No way. The movie.
Yep. Seems like it had a big impact on his imagination. So you have this mix of like the history of Oklahoma, these larger than life monuments, and then this fantastical world of Oz. It all kind of fed into his art.
That's a pretty unique blend. Okay, so then comes Italy, the Fulbright. How did that shape him as an artist?
Well, it was transformative, to say the least. He was blown away by the art he saw at the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, and then the Capuchin catacombs in Palermo. That was a whole other experience.
I've heard of those catacombs. Pretty eerie, right?
Yeah, they're definitely intense, but also historically significant. And it seems like both the Renaissance art and the catacombs, they got under his skin. He was particularly drawn to Botticelli, those flowing lines, those allegorical themes.
Birth of Venus.
Primavera.
Exactly. He even did his own versions of some of those classic works, but with like these contemporary twists.
So he was playing with art history, making it his own.
Totally. And the imagery from both the Renaissance and the catacombs, it kept popping up in his later work. The human form, the passage of time, the weight of history, it all seeped into his art.
Fascinating. And after Italy, he ends up at Rice University in Houston. What was going on with his art during that time? So his time at Rice, it marked a shift. He was exploring new themes, new ideas. This is when he created his Saint Bambola series.
Saint Bambola. I've never heard of that.
It's pretty interesting. His writings from that time suggest he was really wrestling with questions of artistic identity. Like,
Okay.
what does it mean to be an artist in the contemporary world? What's my place in all this? I think a lot of artists go through that.
That makes sense. That
Yeah.
struggle to find your voice.
Yeah, exactly. And it seems like he was determined to push boundaries, to move beyond those established narratives.
He wasn't afraid to experiment.
Not at all. And he was also very collaborative. He had this thing called B&E Productions with these other artists, Earl Staley and Joe Tate.
B&E Productions.
Yeah, it was more than just, making art together. They organized these unconventional exhibitions, like the tattoo show. This is before tattoos were, widely accepted as art.
Ahead of their time, huh?
Yeah, and they also did Joe Tate's Backyard and the camping show. They were all about challenging the idea of where art could be experienced.
So they were blurring the lines between art and life, making it an experience.
Exactly. And later on, they took it even further with this thing called holding firm. They rented a house together and, made art collaboratively, but they also did all this unauthorized construction stuff.
Really? Sounds kind of rebellious.
Totally. But it shows how much Camblin valued collaboration, working with other artists, bouncing ideas off each other.
Yeah, and pushing the limits. Speaking of pushing limits, I noticed he often signed his work as anonymous or anonymous artists. What was that about?
That was all about taking the focus off the individual ego. He wasn't interested in fame or recognition. He wanted the art to speak for itself.
So it was a statement about the art being more important than the artist.
Yeah, I think so. And then there's that really visually striking style he developed, the mouche volantes.
Mouche volantes. What's that?
It's French for flying flies, which is kind of weird, right?
Ah.
But it actually refers to those little floaters you see in your vision sometimes.
Oh, right.
And Camblin, he developed this technique, along with Nancy Giordano, where they use these tiny dots and dashes to create these subtle optical illusions.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. They're playing with your perception, making you question what you're seeing.
It kind of reminds me of Escher or Dali, those artists who, messed with your mind a bit.
Totally. They were all exploring the boundaries of reality and perception. And then later on in his career, he created the Big Owl series and Descent from the Cross.
What can you tell us about those?
Well, they show his range as an artist. Big Al seems to be more autobiographical, telling stories from his life, while Descent from the Cross, that's a multimedia piece that delves into these big themes of suffering and resilience.
Heavy stuff.
Yeah. And all through this time, he was still moving around a lot, living in Oregon, then Louisiana before he passed away, really dedicated to his art, living on his own terms.
A true individual.
Yeah.
All right, let's dive into a specific piece now. Fire. This lithograph from his Zen and the Art of Enlightenment series.
Okay, yeah. Fire. It's part of a set of 4, right? With air, earth, and water.
Right. So what are we looking at here? Describe it for us.
All right, so visually, fire, it's intense. You see these warm colors, ochre, burnt orange in the foreground. You immediately get a sense of heat, like a conflagration.
Okay, I can see that.
And right down the middle, there's this chasm, this deep divide with these jagged edges like flames or fissures.
Dynamic. Chaotic.
Exactly. And then in the foreground, there are these dark figures, almost like charred remains, like they've been through something destructive.
That's powerful.
Yeah, in the background, it fades to these pale, ashy tones. It's like the aftermath of a fire.
So title Fire, it's not just a name, it's the whole feeling of the piece.
Totally. And given the whole Zen connection, Zen and the Art of Enlightenment, it makes you think about fire as a symbol in Zen philosophy.
What does fire represent in that context?
Well, it represents impermanence, change, the burning away of illusions, of attachments, like clearing the way for understanding.
Interesting. So that central divide, that chasm, could it be seen as like the point of transformation?
Absolutely. It's where destruction leads to renewal. And Zen teachings, they often emphasize embracing those periods of upheaval, seeing them as part of growth.
Letting go of what's no longer serving you.
Exactly. And there's also that connection to the I Ching, that ancient Chinese text. Remember the YouTube video we watched?
Yeah, they were talking about hexagram 56, the Wanderer.
Right. And it lines up perfectly with the image of fire. The Wanderer is all about adapting to change, about being comfortable with instability. Just like fire, it never stays still, always moving, consuming, transforming.
Always in flux.
Yeah, and the I Ching is saying, embrace those disruptions. They're part of the journey.
So both Zen and the I Ching, they're saying fire is this catalyst. It burns away the unnecessary to make way for the essential.
And if you look at it from an art history perspective, fire, it has connections to movements like abstract expressionism. Those artists who were exploring primal forces, using these bold gestures and textures.
Right. It reminds me of Antoni Tapis.
Exactly. Those raw textures, the burnt colors, it all speaks to these big existential questions about destruction and rebirth.
It's amazing how this one piece can connect to so many different ideas.
Hmm.
And the book Zen and the Art of Enlightenment, it describes fire as a visual meditation
Yeah.
on the impermanence of thought and language.
Right. It's making you think about how our thoughts, our words, they're constantly shifting, constantly changing. And the YouTube analysis, it takes it even further. They say fire could represent existential discomfort. That feeling of having your certainties challenged.
Burning away the old to make way for the new.
Exactly. And it's like that in the creative process too, right? Sometimes you have to destroy what you thought you knew to come up with something truly new.
Embrace the chaos.
Yeah, step into the fire. And I think that's the real message of the piece. What illusions are you holding on to? What needs to be burned away so you can grow?
Deep questions. Okay, let's shift gears again and talk about Camblin's overall artistic philosophy. What were the driving forces behind his work?
Well, it seems like he was really trying to transcend those traditional ideas of art criticism and the commercial side of the art world.
He wasn't interested in selling out.
No, not at all. He wanted his art to connect with people on a deeper level, to bypass the intellect and speak to the soul.
To evoke a feeling.
Exactly. And in that review of his show, The Art of Everything, the critic said that Camblin's work was more about asking questions than providing answers.
Makes sense. It's about getting the viewer to think, to question.
Yeah. And remember those paradoxes he created in his drawings, like a trap that does not trap?
Oh yeah, those were fascinating.
They're all about challenging your assumptions, making you look beyond the surface.
And they play into that theme of illusion, right? The idea that things aren't always what they seem.
Exactly. And those traps he included in his work, those fear traps, time traps, they're like these little narratives,
Yeah.
about the things that can hold us back.
Those limitations we impose on ourselves.
Right. And then there's that theme of stillness in his art. The figures that seem bound or trapped, the pillars that seem bolted down.
It creates this tension, right, between stillness and movement.
Totally. Is it about endurance, about resisting change? Or is it about finding peace in the midst of chaos? It's up to the viewer to decide.
He's not giving you easy answers.
Nope. And it seems like his main goal was to evoke these subjective states of mind, to get people thinking about the mystical, the unexplainable.
Open their minds.
Yeah. And he used all these hidden meanings, these little secrets in his work. Things you only notice if you really look closely.
Like there's more than meets the eye.
Exactly. And the closer you look, the more questions you have. He also wove in all these personal symbols and explored themes of transformation, the cycle of life and death.
So his art was very personal, but also universal.
Right. And he had this playful side, too. He said, if you think it's funny, I'll get serious. And if you think it's serious, I'll make a joke of it.
Classic Camblin, never taking himself too seriously.
Exactly. And his biography mentions that he started out doing more social commentary in his art, but then shifted to these more internal symbolic explorations.
He was always evolving.
Yeah, and his interest in artists like Cremoni and those Etruscan figurines, it definitely influenced his style.
And what about those corrections in his drawings? Where it looks like he's painted over things or added paper on top?
Yeah, those were intentional. He wanted his drawings to be seen as just as important as his paintings.
To elevate the medium.
Exactly, and he used those corrections to add layers of meaning, to create a sense of history and texture.
So it was all part of the process.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think he wanted people to really engage with his art, to approach it like a puzzle, to explore it and find their own meaning in it.
To discover something about themselves.
Right. All right, let's wrap things up by hearing from some people who knew Camblin or who studied his work closely. What did they have to say about him?
Okay, let's get some outside perspectives.
Well, Pete Gershon, he called Camblin a mystical trickster figure, which I think sums him up pretty well, that mix of the mysterious and the playful. And Gershon also said that Camblin's work deserves to be rediscovered.
It's time for a Camblin revival.
Exactly. And George O. Jackson Jr., he talked about the need to read Camblin's art. Like, you have to decipher those layers of meaning.
There's a depth there that requires some effort.
Right. And Earl Staley, one of Camblin's collaborators, he said that Camblin taught him how to draw, how to compose. He had a huge influence on him.
So he was a mentor to other artists as well.
Definitely. And Penny Serling, she remembers him as someone who was always questioning everything, always up for a debate, a good argument.
He liked to challenge people's thinking.
Yeah, he was a provocateur. And Carolyn Farb, she described him as a free spirit, said his art was like a visual autobiography.
Expressing his life through his work.
Exactly. So all these different perspectives, they paint a picture of this complex, influential, and fiercely independent artist.
A real original. So, as we come to the end of our deep dive into the world of Bob Camblin, what are the key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, we've been exploring the work of an artist who is grappling with some of life's biggest questions: the nature of existence, the inevitability of change, the connections between seemingly unrelated things.
And he challenged the way we think about art itself.
Absolutely. He wasn't interested in easy answers. He wanted to provoke, to challenge, to make people think for themselves. And his life, it was a testament to that philosophy. He lived on his own terms, never compromising his vision.
And Fire, that lithograph, it really captures a lot of those ideas. The destruction that's necessary for growth, the impermanence of everything, the potential for transformation.
Right. Camblin's work, it's all about seeing the world differently, embracing paradox, questioning everything, and appreciating the mystery of it all.
It's not about finding all the answers, is it?
No, it's about being okay with not knowing, with embracing the questions. And that's what we want to leave you with today. As you go about your day, your week, your life, remember what Bob Camblin taught us. Look closer, question everything, and find the beauty in the unknown. Who knows what you might discover?